Hey guys, welcome back to another video from Coding for Kids. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this rock blaster game. So let me show you how it works. So let's hit the green flag to get started. And basically the objective of the game is to pilot this rocket and blow up the different asteroids slash rocks slash comets that are hurling towards you. So let me show you that again. So the thing is, you're going to be using your arrow keys to control the rocket, and you can hit the space bar to shoot the lasers. And on contact, the rocks are going to explode, and if you touch the rocks, you're going to die and the game's going to end. So let me show you how to code this game. So like always, we first need to create a new project. So let's just hit create on at the top, and let's wait for it. So even though there's a bunch of rocks that were coming towards the rocket, there's only one actual rock that acts as a sprite, and all the other rocks are just its clones. So let's first start off by making all the sprites, and then let's make the backdrops, and then let's get into the code. So we don't need the cat sprite, so we can get rid of that. And in order to pick a new sprite, we just have to go to the bottom right and click choose a sprite. And the first sprite that I'm going to pick is the rocket sprite. So this is what it looks like. So let me pick that. And then I'm going to need two more sprites. So my next sprite is going to be the laser sprite. And there's not actually a laser sprite, so I'm just going to use a button because it looks kind of like a laser beam, and that's going to be my laser sprite. And then I now have to get a rock sprite, so let's just use this one, rock. So those are my three sprites. Next, let's go into the backdrops and pick a space themed backdrop. So the backdrop that I was using in the demo was called Nebula, and I really like it. So I'm just going to use that. And we're going to make a backdrop now. So instead of picking a backdrop from the Scratch library, we're going to make one. So hit Paint in the choose a backdrop and then hit Paint. And then basically what this backdrop is it's just going to tell us that our game ended. So it's just the game over backdrop. So we don't need this one, but this backdrop right here. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And then this is going to be our game over backdrop. So let's name our backdrop because that's good practice. So game over. And it's also good practice to name your project. So I'm going to name this Rock Blaster Game, just like that. So I'm going to keep my backdrop simple. It's just going to say game over. So I'm going to use the type tool to write game over in really big letters. Okay, I don't like this font, so I'm going to go into the thing and pick marker, like this better. So I need to click on the backdrop and type in game over, just like that. And I want to make it bigger, so I'm going to use the mouse tool and drag out the corner so that it's big. And then in order to center it on the actual backdrop, you need to drag this plus over to the circle in the middle. So just drag that and place it on the circle, and you can feel it like lock in. So once you let go, it's going to be right in the center of the screen. Okay, let's go back to the backdrop. Okay, and once you're at this point, if you want, you can make it bigger or smaller so that you can just change its size. And then anytime you adjust it, make sure you drag it back to the center so that it looks really nice. Okay, now let's go to our sprites and let's start coding. So before I start coding, actually, I'm going to change the backdrop or the costume for my sprite. So I don't like the one where it has the window on it, so I'm just going to pick the third one where there is no window. So that's going to be the costume I'm going to be using for my rocket ship sprite. So I'm going to go into my button, and I don't like the blue button as much as I like the orange button, so I'm going to be using the orange button for this. So I'm going to pick the second costume in the orange button, and then there's only one costume for rocks, so you can't change that. So let's go into a rocket ship and let's go into the code section. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change its size. Right now it's like giant. It's like takes up a lot of space. So I'm going to change its size to 45 because I like this size and I think it's not too big or too small. Um, let's change the sizes for the button and the rocks when we get to it. So for the rocket ship, currently it's pointing up, right? We don't want that. We want it to point to the right so that it can actually face the incoming rocks. So we're going to do that by changing the direction. So right now it's at 90. So let's just change that to 180 and it should be pointing to the side now. Yep, as you can see, it points to the side now. All right, so let's start our code. So we always need to start off with when the green flag is clicked. So let's use that. And then we're going to always show the sprite because we want the rocket to start off showing. And then we always want to switch the backdrop to nebula because that's going to be our actual backdrop where we play the game on. And then we always want to set its size to 45% because sometimes this value could change and the rocket's size could change, but we're always going to lock it at 45% so the user can't really mess with their game. And every time I start the game, I want it to go to somewhere around here. So that's like -191 and like negative, gonna go a little lower. So like -14. So -14. So as you can see, whenever I click the green flag, it's always going to go to that location. So I could like move it here and then click the green flag and it goes back to its starting point. Okay, so before we do anything else, let's first make a score variable. So let's go into variables and make a variable, score. So this variable is going to be responsible for keeping track of our score as we blow up the rocks. So let's go back and actually, let's also initialize the score variable to 0 every time we start the game. So change that to score and then set score to 0. Let's just put that there. Okay, now let's code the controls for the rocket. So let's make it go up and down. So the way we do that is by going to control and dragging the forever loop out, and let's use two if blocks to code the controls, one for the up arrow and one for the down arrow. So let's go into sensing and drag the key block. So let's duplicate that. And we don't need it running. Let's just end that. And so if the up arrow is pressed, the code in here is going to run. And if the down arrow is pressed, the code in here is going to run. So when the up arrow is pressed, we want the rocket to go up. So we're going to go into motion and use the change Y by block. So let's change Y by 10. And if the down arrow is pressed, we want to change Y by -10 because we want the rocket to go down, not up. So let me just change that real quick and there. Now let's try our code. So when I click the green flag, I should be able to move the rocket up and down. And yep, I'm able to do that. So our code works. Okay. Next, let's code the button/laser sprite. So this is not my button sprite, this is my laser sprite. So I'm going to rename that. And this sprite is a little more complicated than the rocket sprite, but I'm going to guide you guys through it. So it's all nice and easy. So once again, we need to start with the green flag. So when green flag is clicked, we want to set its size to 15%. 100 is way too big. So let's change it to 15 so that it actually looks like a laser and not another rock or something. Okay, so there's my laser. So I want to lock it at 15%. So every time my game starts, I want to set it to 15%. So I'm going to use the look block to do that. So set size to 15%. And the laser, every time I shoot the laser, I'm actually shooting clones of the laser sprite, not the actual sprite itself. So I'm just going to put this in the corner so that nothing interferes with it. So I'm just going to hide it because we don't need the actual sprite to be there. And then, like I said before, the lasers are going to be shot out every time we press the space key. So let's go into events and drag this block out. So when space key is pressed, we want to create clones of the laser, right? So let's go into control and make clones of myself. So what this does is every time the space key is pressed, it's going to make clones of the laser sprite. But the problem is, if we just make clones of the laser sprite, they're going to be at random positions. So in order to fix that, whoa, can't. Okay, I just cut out for a second. But anyways, let's connect that block. And like I was saying, every time I press the space key, we're going to be shooting clones of the laser sprite. So if we just leave it as is right now, the clones are going to be generated at random places. And that's not what we want. So as you guys can see, all the clones are like right on top of itself. So that's not what we want. So let's just stop this project and let's drag this back down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically code the clones. We're going to code what the clones are supposed to do. So we're going to do that by using when I start as a clone block. And we're going to set it so that the clone goes to the X and Y coordinate of the actual rocket ship itself. So I'm going to go into motion and use the go-to block. So that's right here. And then I'm going to go into sensing and I'm going to use this block, the backdrop number of stage. But if you change the sprite or if you change the drop down where it says stage to rocket ship, it's going to actually change to X position. So you can drop that there, and let's duplicate that and place this here. And let's change this to the Y position. So now what happens is every time I press the spacebar, a new clone is going to be created, but it's going to be created where the rocket is. So that kind of gives the illusion that the rocket is shooting the lasers and not some random thing. And once a clone is created, we want to show the clone, right? Because we don't want to be shooting invisible lasers. We want to be shooting lasers we can actually see. So let me drag the show block there. Okay, so now all we coded is, so now everything we've coded just makes the clone show up. We actually have to make the clone move to the right so that it looks like a laser. And the way we're going to do that is by going into control and using a forever block. And we're going to go into motion and use move 10 steps. So now what this does is when the clone gets created, it's just going to move to 10 steps to the right forever. But that's kind of weird because once it reaches the edge of the screen, we don't want it to be stuck in the edge and look all ugly, right? We want it to disappear. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go into control, and if the clone is touching the edge, so go into sensing and drag this, and we're going to change that to edge. So if the clone is touching the edge of the screen, we want to delete it, right? So that the laser just doesn't get stuck at the edge. So delete this clone. So let's test that out. So I'm going to hit the play, and as you can see, every time I press the space bar, it like makes clones. So let me show you guys that again. So every time I press the space bar, it's going to make the clones, and because the clones are always, what? Whoops, I accidentally paused the recording. But anyways, let me show you guys that again. And basically every time I press the spacebar, the clones are being created where the rocket ship is. So that's what makes it look like they're being shot out of the rocket ship. Okay, so that's all the lasers are going to be for now. So let's go into the rock sprite. Okay, the rock sprite has the most code out of all three, out of the other two. Okay, so straight off the bat, we're going to start creating clones of the rock. So let's go to when green flag is clicked. We want to set its size to 50% because 100% is too big. So 50%. And we're going to hide the rock. Just like we did the laser sprite, we're going to hide the rock and only show its clones. So we're going to hide it, and then we're going to make 4 clones. So repeat, let's use a repeat loop. So I'm going to change the inside of the repeat loop to 4, and I'm going to create a clone 4 times. Okay, now we're going to code the actual clones themselves, and I meant to place this block right here. Set the size to 50%. Okay, so let's go into control, and when I start as a clone, let's go to a random X and Y position because we want these rocks to be computer generated and we want them to be random so that the user can't predict where the rocks are going to be. So that's going to add another level of complexity and it's going to make the game more fun. So let's use the go-to block and let's use the pick random operator so that the computer picks where the block shows up. So let's say go to random position, and I'm just gonna make the bound 64 and 228. So these are from like a previous measurement kind of thing where I just placed the rock at different spots and I just like these numbers. So these are the numbers that I'm gonna use, and you guys feel free to use these too. So I'm gonna make the y negative 165 and the upper bound 163. So that means the rock can show up anywhere in like this range. So it can show up from here to here to here to here and anywhere in between. Okay. And once the rock like takes its place, I'm going to show the clone so that we can actually see the rocks in so that we can actually shoot them. And at this point, we're going to make a new variable. Let's call this rock speed. And this variable is going to control how fast the rocks are moving. So speed. Okay. And we don't need to say this variable label up here, so I'm just going to hide it. Yeah. And we're going to set rock speed to different speeds each time the clone is generated. So we're going to go to operators again and use pick random so that a random speed is, picked by the computer and so that the user has a harder time predicting the position of the rock. So let's make it -3 to -6. So the reason I made these negative is because we want the rocks to be moving to the left so that the rocket can shoot them from the left. So in Scratch, every time it's a positive, it's going to move to the right or to the up. But if it's a negative, it's going to move to the left. That's why we're making the speeds negative so that the rock moves to the left. Once you do that, you're going to need a forever loop. And inside the forever loop, you're going to put a change x by. So change x by block. And you want to change x by the speed of the rock. So go into variables and use the rock speed variable to control how fast the x changes. Okay, now we're going to use a bunch of if statements to basically outline the different scenarios that could happen to the rock. So let's go into control and let's just duplicate these. And you're placing them, you're stacking them, you're not putting them inside of each other. So once you do that, our first if statement is, the first scenario that could happen is, what if the rock touches a rocket? So we're going to address that in the first if statement. So let's go into sensing and we're going to go touching rocket. So when the rock is touching the rocket, that's basically the end of the game, right? So we're going to go into events and create a broadcast message and broadcast a game over message so that all the sprites know that the game is over. So new message, and let's name it game over. So we're going to have to go back to the other sprites and tell them what the game over broadcast means, but basically we're just getting started with the broadcast statement. The next scenario that could happen is, what if the rock crosses the rocket? So what if it like hits this edge? At that point, we don't want it to stop. We want it to disappear and go back to the right so that they can once again go to the left. So we're going to use another operator for that, and we're going to use less than operator. And basically what we're measuring in this operator is the x position, and we're measuring it against an x coordinate. So let's go into motion and let's grab the x position block. And basically this is like about the point. That's a clone, so that's why it's not changing, but this is the actual block. Yeah, at this point I want the rock to disappear and reappear on the right. So that's like about that's an x coordinate of around negative 204. When it does that, I want it to go back to the right? So that's why I'm going to duplicate this block and just put that in here. So as you can see, that's what it looks like. Once it passes that point, it goes back to the right. And then once it passes that point, it goes back to the right. And every time it's going to pick random spots to go to. Okay, the final scenario that could happen is, what if the rock is touching the laser? So what if we actually hit the rock with the laser? So we're gonna address that in this third if statement. So let's go back to sensing and let's use this if statement. And if it's touching the laser, we want to first give the user points because, they're basically accomplishing the objective of the game. So let's go into variables and not set, but let's change the score variable by, let's say 200 points, because that's a lot of points. And then once their score increases, we want the rock to go back to the right. So let's just duplicate this block. Oh, that duplicates the entire thing. So let's just duplicate this block, put it in here. And basically now we should have a kind of working game. So as you can see, yeah, and then let's just ram into a rock. Okay, so basically nothing's happening because while you're broadcasting the game over message, you haven't told Scratch what that message means. So let's do that next. So first, or once you broadcast the game over message, the first sprite that's going to receive it is the rock sprite because, that's the sprite that's broadcasting the message. So let's go into events and let's do when I receive game over. So once the sprite receives game over, we want it to hide because we don't want any more rocks to, randomly show up. So let's go into looks and let's go into hide. So when I receive game over, I'm going to hide and I'm going to stop all of the scripts because I don't want anything else to run when the game ends. So, okay, the my variable showed up for some reason. Okay, that was weird, but anyways, this should fix it. So when the rocks hit the rocket, all of them disappear. So that's what we wanted to happen. And then let's define the broadcast message in the rocket sprite. So now when I receive game over, I'm going to switch the backdrop to the game over backdrop because that's going to be our game over backdrop. So switch backdrop to game over. And I also want the rocket to hide because we don't want the rocket to show on the game over backdrop. So go into looks and grab the hide button or the hide block. And we also want to stop all of the scripts in the sprite. So let's just go to stop and then change it to stop other scripts in the sprite. So basically what's going to happen is this script is going to stop immediately. So let's see that. So when the rocket hits into the rocks, the backdrop switches. Now let's define it for the laser button or the laser sprite. So we have this, and this. So let's go into events and drag out a when I receive game over. I'm going to hide because we don't want to see the lasers anymore. And then I'm going to go into control and I'm going to stop all the other scripts in the sprite. So that's just going to stop all of these. So let's check our game. So yeah, it seems to work fine. And oh, we have a problem. As you can see, even though the backdrop switches to the game over backdrop, you can still see the lasers. So we need to fix that. And the way we're going to fix that is by using the my variable. So this method is kind of weird, but it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the my variable to 0 every time the green flag is clicked, and you'll see why. And when I receive game over, I'm going to set my variable to 50. Okay? And then when I'm making clones, I'm going to make sure that I don't make the clones after I receive the game over broadcast. So the way I'm going to do that is by going into an if, because that's what's going to dictate whether or not something's going to happen. And then I'm going to use a not operator. And inside the not operator, I'm going to use an equal to operator and keep that as 50. And go into variables and grab the my variable block and put that in the if statement. So now watch what happens. So when I click play, when I run into the rocks, as you can see, when I hit the space key, we don't see any more laser pointers. And that's because we're setting a variable to a certain value. And when it's that value, we're stopping the script. So that's what this means. So if the my variable is not 50, then the clones are going to be created. But if it is 50, then the clones are not going to be created. So that's what you're doing here. And hopefully this makes sense. So let's go into the rocks and let's make sure everything works by testing our game. So let's make it full screen and let's hit the green flag. So yeah, my score's going up fine. Yeah, that looks good. And let's try hitting a rock and let's see what happens. And yeah, it worked exactly like I wanted to. So yeah, hope you guys had fun making this game. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us. Hope this helped. Bye guys, I'll see you later.